participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but the public can access this meeting while in progress by Zoom Video Communications, Inc. Members of the public attending this meeting virtually will be allowed to make comments if they wish to do so during the portion of the hearing designated for public comment by telephone, cell phone, or personal computer using Zoom. And as always, certain guidelines for Zoom. Please utilize the chat or the raise hand function if you want to be addressed by the board. We generally leave people on mute until they are actually addressed by the board. And participants are required to display their first and last names. That said, by tradition, we will start with a roll call of members in attendance. I am Brian Barabee.
Paul Brandwold. Jim Garrity.
Jillian Glathanos.
Rebecca Longball, and Bill may have just joined us, unless that was a different Bill. I'm going to presume it was a different Bill for now.
Okay. All right, opening this evening's meeting. So the Bolton Conservation Commission will now continue the public hearing under Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, to consider a notice of intent filed for 580 Main Street, DEP file number 112-0719. Rebecca, is the applicant or a representative for the applicant here this evening?
Yes, we have Jim Lambert and Phil Cordero here this evening. It may be helpful, Mr. Chair, if the commission requests a summary or a presentation of the information that's been submitted to date regarding the revised documents.
That would sound like a proper way to start, or at least bring us back up to speed. Phil, if you are comfortable doing that, I would love to give you the floor.
I'm happy to do it, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Phil Cordero from Allen and Major Associates here, as Rebecca mentioned, along with the applicant, Mr. Jim Lambert for Alton, Neshoba Valley. With your permission, I'll share my screen so that way we can look at graphics. Okay, bear with me for just a moment. Okay, terrific. So what I would like to do is, Rebecca really laid out an excellent path forward. When we were last with you a couple of weeks ago, we had presented to this commission some geometric layout changes on site. And as the commission was digesting that information, you requested additional considerations, additional review of the materials that are on there. And we provided a response letter back to the commission dated November 22. So you would have received it just before the holiday. So I hope everybody took time during Thanksgiving dinner to read it over dessert. But in there is a summary of the conversation that we had at the last meeting. That will be the substance of my walkthrough here with you this evening. There were just a handful of bullet points, and we'll talk about each one and then certainly answer any additional questions that the commission may have of us here this evening. So the first one, and not all of them necessitate viewing on the screen, but when they do, I'll certainly take you through the changes appropriate. The first one that was raised is we are doing a sidewalk behind Building 4, a pedestrian footpath that will be sandwiched between the residential building and the southerly pond and the BVW that surrounds the pond. The commission had asked of our willingness to consider an alternate material for that sidewalk. So we have proposed in the revised plans to use stone dust. So it is slightly less impervious than asphalt. So it is a betterment in that regard. We do want to make sure that the commission understands why we've elected for stone dust. It's a compactable material. It's a gradable material. More importantly, it's an accessibly compliant material. So should we have any residents in Building 4 that are handicapped and require wheelchair accessibility, they can maneuver and navigate on there. We also do have our playground currently located behind Building 4. We want to make sure that that portion of the sidewalk that's necessary for them to cross, let me flip over where the sidewalk is shown. Excuse me, and the playground, forgive me. So we have the playground in the southwest corner of Building 4, as you can see on the screen. So there is a portion of accessibility requirements from the parking field due west of Building 4 to at least get to that playground. So we felt stone dust, in our opinion, would be, we think, a decent compromise between the request of going more permeable, but still making sure that the residents can utilize the area effectively. That at the last meeting, the commission asked for more information regarding snow management. So this is a bit of a broader topic for the site. And I think the best way we can approach it for discussion is we have a very large site that is very small. And it's very small for a lot of reasons. We have not only the residential buildings, we have the surface parking that supports the residential buildings and the vehicular access ways around it. But we also have the resource areas and the buffers that we're here to discuss with this commission. And we also have our public drinking water supply wellhead protection zones, the zone 1. When all of those elements are put on the same piece of paper, our very large plot of land really becomes very, very small, quite frankly. So what we endeavored to do in the response letter to you is to outline what our routine snow management practices would be. So alongside each of our vehicular traveled way, we maintain what we call a snow shelf. So this is routinely a shoulder alongside of the roadway that allows plows to basically go down the driveways and move snow off the driveways onto the shoulder of the roadways to create passability. Passability in this case is, of course, not only for the residents, but it's really primarily for emergency fire apparatus circulation. We want to make sure that those residents or the fire department and emergency services can access the residential complex as quickly as possible. So surrounding the entire perimeter of the site, the developed site, we do have this snow shelf that'll exist adjacent to all of our roadways. What we don't have are snow management areas designated beyond that, meaning we certainly don't allocate areas within the flood storage replication, within the zone 1 area, and within any resource area boundaries for the piling of snow. So once we have our roadways opened and available and accessible, we would then fall under the premise of specific on-site snow management to either move that snow to areas where there's unused parking spaces, unused areas of the site that fall outside of these jurisdictional buffer areas, or otherwise remove it from the property. Now, what we want to make sure we're clear about is what I've just discussed in 30 seconds is not an instantaneous task. We obviously have to manage that over the course of the snowfall. Sometimes it occurs overnight. Sometimes it occurs throughout the day. So the on-site property management staff will be well-versed in how to address the snow as it's being accumulated and put into motion necessary plans to make sure the snow is removed from the site as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, but again, not always instantaneously. So the plan essentially becomes a focus of on-site property management rather than designation on a particular plan. But we do want to, again, assert for the record, no snow storage within resource areas, of course. No snow storage within resource area buffers, of course. No snow storage within replication areas, both bordering vegetated wetlands or the flood, the flood storage replication. And I think those might be more of the paramount issues that the commission here has, and we can talk about that in greater detail. Now, one element that came up was the use of snow fencing around the site, and we would ask the commission to consider not requiring that, quite frankly. We understand the purpose of it. The purpose is to make sure that snow is not incidentally or accidentally pushed into these areas that I've just told you we're not going to put it in. That's what the snow fencing does. It's a visible fence that the snowplow operators would say, don't go within that. It's also a bit of a distraction, a detraction aesthetically from the residential site that we're trying to create. So it asks to not do that. In lieu of that, we want to assert that we have in place where we have zone 1 areas of protection. We will have signage to denote that those are the public drinking water supply protection wellheads. That's required by Mass DEP. We would seek to reinforce those as being prohibitive barriers, visual barriers, if you will, for our maintenance people to not move snow within those areas. Where we have the buffer zones to the wetlands adjacent to our easterly parking field and our southerly parking field, One other item that came up was, would you consider installation of a post and rail fence to demarc some of those areas that are more sensitive? And the revised plans that we have do demarc a post and rail fence. You sort of see it partially here, right behind building 4, this dashed with the square picket denotes what we would put in adjacent to the BVW area and adjacent to the pond on the rear of the building. And that actually continues around on the easterly side of the building, just to the point where the parking is. We would use those as a visual barrier. And similarly, let me just jump over to the other plan. Forgive my delay here. Sorry, just takes a second for it to load. We would have a similar post and rail fence. Here it comes. Along this easterly parking tray, which is abutting more sensitive resource areas, most notably the riverfront to Great Brook and the BVW to Great Brook. So we'd seek to use those as landscape-based stylistic choices in lieu of the snow fencing. And, we're happy to entertain discussion on that here this evening after the presentation. The other thing that the site affords us the opportunity to do is, again, we want to recognize that there are large resource areas on the property. We want to recognize the concerns that this commission would have in terms of resource area protection. We obviously have an opportunity here, and the applicant recognizes an opportunity to make sure that we are doing our part to protect these resource areas, and snow management is key to that. Not only just the actual movement of snow, but also the pre-treatment for ice buildup on the roadways. So we welcome a discussion tonight to talk about maybe what the commission would prefer, or maybe you have an inherent policy, or what you've done on, most notably on other sites in town, as restrictions, or maybe better said, alternate methods of de-icing. So instead of overloading the site with salt, maybe it's a calcium chloride, maybe it's liquid, maybe it's sand. And those are things we'd like to talk to you tonight about, and get the flavor for what the commission typically utilizes as part of the overall management. The next item that came up was some additional information relative to landscaping, again, against those sensitive areas. So changing my screen now to the landscape plan behind building 4. This plan is now in your package. It wasn't in the last submission set. This has additional detail for those slope areas directly adjacent to the resource. And what's in there is the notation that we anticipate seeding those slopes with the New England Conservation and Wildlife seed mix. We will also plant native shrubs and evergreen, including pin oak, eastern red cedar, winterberry, and blueberry. And that's all done under the auspices of our landscape architect. The idea of these slopes is we would allow them to grow naturally. Minimal mowing, minimum vegetative removal once they're installed, and of course, no fertilizer. Choosing plants that can survive on the slope adjacent to these resource areas without the need for fertilization on these back slopes. So this would exist directly behind building 4, but then also the slope that's on the easterly side of the parking tray adjacent to Great Brook. So those plans have been provided with the additional detail that I believe the commission was seeking, really more as a confirmation as to what we're going to do in there, or more importantly, what we're going to do, and then just let it go, let it grow naturally, and it'll do its own thing on the inside of the resource area buffers. Number 4, the commission's agent made a request about changing the angle of discharge for our stormwater flared ends that are off that easterly parking tray. I'm happy to accommodate that. We've rotated the angle, so rather than discharging it in a more easterly fashion, which shortens the distance between the resource areas, we're happy to direct it more southerly. The southerly has a better benefit in that it increases that on-surface movement time. But in this case, it can actually, in those low flow, high frequency, low flow precipitation events, it can actually help feed the wetland replication areas by providing surface water to inundate the groundwater. So I think we've actually solved a couple of problems there, and made a betterment in the solution as to how that whole area is going to function at the end of the day. Comment number 5 on the letter. is the commission wanted the plans to be as complete and thorough as they can be at this point. So the question of irrigation was raised. And we have the anticipated use of irrigation on the site. What we don't have is a design of irrigation. We have not engaged the irrigation consultant. We don't know where the well is located, where the components are, what the spray patterns would be, where the spray patterns would be. That's all elements that would come as part of the full and final design. We're happy to, if this commission should allow it, we could provide back to you a full and final detailed plan once we have it for you. But what we've done in the plan set tonight is we have affirmed that we're seeking the use of irrigation. We have provided irrigation conduit sleeves throughout all of the site planning, connecting all of the islands to denote and encapsulate really all of the underground work that would need to be performed. And then when the irrigation is put in at a later date, we could pull it through the sleeves rather than having to rip up the pavement. So we've answered the question in sort of a stopgap manner because we don't have the full and final design, but would like to talk that through a little further here this evening with the commission as to how we can navigate those waters. What we will do when we get into the irrigation design is we hire, we in this case is certainly the applicants, professional consultants that don't simply dot the landscaping with irrigation heads. They're all over the place. You water 7 days a week, 20 minutes every zone, which results in over inundation of watering. It's oversaturation of the soils. Nobody's looking for that. And we want to assert that for the benefit of the commission, that what the designer would do is look at the particular species plantings that are done in conjunction with the landscape architect and really provide just a minimum amount of water that's necessary. And in a lot of cases, rather than direct spraying and direct application on the shrubs, it's more of incidental spraying. So it gets just enough water to grow and sustain itself without overutilization of water off of the water below surface grade and saturation of the soils that otherwise create that mucky mud condition I don't think anybody would be looking for here. Comment number 6 or response 6 was again a confirmation because we have changed the layout of building 4. If the commission was so inclined to ultimately issue a decision on this site plan, you wanted some reasonable confirmation that the fire department, who would probably be most affected by this layout change, did not have any issue with this layout change. So we did communicate with the fire chief, Jeffrey Legender, excuse my mispronunciation. He did provide an email to the commission's agent for record that he has reviewed the plan and he is comfortable with the plan and that it meets his code demands, accessibility requirements, firefighting demands, etc. And no further action would be required on the site planning part with him, even though we have many more meetings to come as we detail fire alarms and other elements of the site planning. We did also coordinate with him, and I'll just jump to it just so you can see the cross section here. It'll just take a moment to load. Forgive the delay. We also wanted to make sure we got onto the plans the dry hydrant specification that the fire department wants to make sure we have in place off of that rear fire pond. It is taking a minute to load. I apologize. It will come up. But it's simply a 6-inch PVC pipe that's going to be buried at least 2 feet above the bottom of the southerly fire pond that's there, the pond, fire pond, retention pond. And that's to make sure that it's always intaking water. That's to meet the fire department specification. And that 6-inch pipe simply will go to a dry stand pipe. So a 6-inch pipe with a bell on it that they can connect to, and they will actually draft the water out of the pond. Oh, there we go. Try one more time. I just want to be able to show it to you here. Here we go. So this is what you would be looking at the rear pond. So this portion on the right, that would be the actual pond. We need to make sure that the depth of the PVC is obviously at least 4 feet below, 4.5 preferred, for freezing conditions, obviously, and then a foot up from the bottom of the pond, so it's not drawing muck up from there. The end of the pipe would be equipped with a strainer and also a vortex plate. And what the vortex plate does is when they turn their pumps on, it doesn't jostle the pump, and it makes sure you're not drawing air through the line, you're just drawing water through the line. It breaks up the vacuum, so to speak. We would maintain that pipe at 4 feet of depth and then bring it up to a dry stand pipe meeting their specifications. Now, all of that work does require some temporary work within the pond. And we tried to put that work on the site plans in terms of a quantitative measurement. So we have about 67 square feet of installation of the pipe that would occur within the bordering vegetative wetland, the perimeter to the pond. And then we would have about 78 square feet for the installation of the pipe within the land under water body. Keeping in mind, that's really just sinking the pipe down into the water. When the construction is being done, we would obviously have to make sure we put in place temporary controls, whether it's sheeting around the perimeter of the pond or around the area of the work to maintain the integrity of the pond and the water level within the pond. So we're not seeking an opportunity to drain the whole pond down. We don't think that will be necessary, but we do need to trench adjacent to it and may need to put in some temporary shoring around it. Now, what we also don't have, similar to the irrigation, we don't have the full detail of that work. What we would want to do there is once there is a contractor engaged for the project, we would sit with them. We could sit with your agent and iron out what those details are. What's the temporary sheeting? Is there dewatering that needs to be done? Where does the dewatering go? Where do the silt bags go? We'd request, again, if the commission is comfortable with this plan, we contemplate a condition that requires us to provide details to you before we do that work. Much akin to like the beaver dam maintenance that already takes place on the site. It's necessary, but we can't do it without making you aware that we're doing it. And we can do that through the commission's agent or back to the commission as you see appropriate. So we just need an opportunity to work with our contractor to figure out the most efficient way to get this done, the quickest way to get it done with the minimum amount of intrusion that we actually have within these resource areas along that southerly line. So we have that on the plans, and we can certainly talk about that here this evening. And then the last one, perhaps sort of the all-encompassing one, is the commission's agent wanted us to really take a minute and identify any ongoing maintenance that would be necessary for this site. And we identified those in really 3 buckets. So the first one is our stormwater management system. And we have operation and maintenance requirements for any of our stormwater systems on site. Those were already contained within the original notice of intent application. And we can talk about the details of those, but we recognize that we need to do those. Those would be done on site. We do have 3 drinking water wells on site. Those will also require some form of non-described maintenance. And I say non-described in that we don't have our permit yet from DEP, but they will prescribe the routine maintenance requirements for each of these wellhead zones. Now, typical maintenance is if the pump fails, we have to go back and look at it. So these areas would be accessed by a pickup truck or a pickup truck with a winch on it. If the pump were to catastrophically fail and we needed to drill a new well, which we hope to never do, that's a different level of maintenance that would trigger a new filing with the commission. So we would compartmentalize that and put that aside. We'd have to come back in front of you with either an RDA or an NOI. But the wellheads are really very self-sufficient. I'm sure you're quite familiar with them given there's no water in town, but it's routine pickup vehicles, routine maintenance men will go into those areas, which are the closest ones to the resource areas. The rear pond would not be altered at all, no maintenance from our perspective, other than if there's an overgrowth of vegetation and there needs to be some sort of vegetation maintenance performed at the rear of the site. So what we also anticipate this commission is going to do, given the previous or the current owner, but their previous order of conditions, which is under file 0701, this commission assigned a number of conditions in perpetuity to the property. And we expect that those conditions are going to be assigned to this applicant through hopefully this order of conditions. And within there were conditions for vegetative maintenance, conditions for beaver dam maintenance. So we anticipate all of those will be encompassed into our order, and we would assume that the commission would recognize those to be normal tasks. Now, within those normal tasks, like the beaver dam maintenance, again, is not a blank check to go do whatever we need to do to control beavers. It's to develop a plan for beaver control when it's necessary and provide it to the commission. So that way you can affirm that it's correct, or the commission's agent can affirm that it's correct, and then go and do that work. So those are the 3 layers of maintenance that we have. There is routine property maintenance, of course. Things like if there's a pothole, the pavement has to be fixed. Those are a little squishy at the moment, in that those are developed over time. We could endeavor to create sort of a mass punch list, but those may never actually be fully realized. But we could talk through tonight with the commission how you'd like us to address some of those property maintenance related matters, landscape maintenance, cutting of the grass, things like that. But we know that cutting of the grass is also addressed as one of those perpetuity conditions, which is don't pile grass clippings, don't pile leaf clippings, don't pile sticks and debris in any of the resource areas that are on site. So we're assuming those to be part of our mandate, so we've not uniquely identified them as new work, if you will. So that's the bullet list I have, about seven issues. We're happy to talk through them in much greater detail, of course, answer any additional questions that the commission may have. Mr. Lambert, I don't know if you wanted to add anything in before we turned it back over to the commission, but that's what I had for tonight.
No, Phil, thank you. I think you covered it well.
All right. Excuse me. Thank you. No, and Phil, I do appreciate that update. I think you addressed everything, all the notes I had taken about things we had discussed. I think you did get through all of those, which I do appreciate. Well, I'll open up to the commission soon for their questions, comments. But just a few that I had offhand starting out, I did the compacted stone dust. I can see the reason. I understand it needs to be ADA compliant, and that is more of a pervious surface. So I could see that use as long as it's properly maintained. I appreciated that. Yeah, the snow fencing and the maintenance around that split, in the areas where there's split rail fence, I can see that working as a similar deterrent to what a snow fencing would do.
Without being bright orange, Mr. Chairman, right? It's a visual barrier.
Yeah. It could also be, written into an order of operation and maintenance plan too, about how to basically, or at least what to avoid. For those, basically, I could see us trying to write something out there saying basically what you outlined for Boink in your letter for how you would try to manage snow. It seemed fairly comprehensive to me. I'll ask Rebecca for her thoughts once I kind of get through all of mine and everything. I'll be curious to see what she had thought, but I could see us including that into an order. I appreciate the letter from the fire department, because again, I never know if they're going to want a last minute change. I just want to make sure they had their say first. And as far as both the irrigation and the need to put in the trenching for the dry hydrant, that's the difficult one for me. And I'm curious as to ways we can look around it, because I understand you'll share the plans with Rebecca before you start, but it's kind of a share and approve. And what authority do we have to not approve certain plans? And again, you describe the perfect person doing irrigation, that only waters the minimal amount and doesn't water in the middle of the day. And at the end of the day, you're going to hire who you hire and what their goals are or whatnot. It's just going to be an irrigation company, right? So we have no real check against that. They could be watering 8,000 gallons of water at 2:00 in the afternoon. That kind of worries me, how, to be able to see the plan before you put it in. And I know we're going to have to trench areas, and most of those, it's just going to get allowed to regrow and naturalize. So I'm not too worried about that long run. But to have some sort of approval over those plans to say, do you need to run irrigation here? Can you run more of a straight line here? Those are the ones that kind of concern me. I did appreciate, and again, I'll ask Rebecca for her comments on some of this. The idea of carrying over the ongoing conditions from what was it, 1120701 to deal with some of those other ongoing regular maintenance issues that we brought up. And those are just some of the things that I had ticked off originally, but I'm curious to hear if other commission members have initial comments, questions, or thoughts.
Brian, I had a question on I guess, one, is it the traditional just 2 rail, post and rail? Were you thinking, I know there's like a 3 level, how tall? We can get lots of snow here, so it can get buried pretty quickly.
We were, through the chair to answer the question, we were thinking of the 2 rail, so the shorter height with just the 2, the top and the bottom rail.
Okay. And the landscape plan is the playground. Is that in the buffer zone?
The playground is in the buffer zone. Everything behind building 4 is in the buffer zone. So yes.
And on the landscape plan, how is the playground connected to, all I saw was landscaping. It didn't kind of go to the left of, are there paths? Are those the crushed stone? Is it graded? What does that look like?
Sure. So happy to answer. There's a slight disconnect in terms of the landscape plan in terms of the area. And let me just see if I can bring it up real quick. And I'll share my screen one more time to answer that. So our landscape architect, excuse me, don't let him know I said that. He provided the slope planting detail, which I asked him to do to answer that question, but he provided it in a very continuous manner, when in reality, what's going to happen along that back slope, and I'm really zooming in here, right off the back of building 4, we would have a continued stone dust path that would lead to the playground zone. So there would actually be a break for a path through that slope and on that slope to get down here. Now you'll notice I've really zoomed in here. These darkened lines represent the contouring that we have. So the contouring in this area actually flattens out quite a bit more than it does as you move easterly, more adjacent to the pond. So those slope plantings will be more densely done to the east of the playground than they would be directly adjacent to the playground. But this plan, the colored plan, as it loads here, this colored plan is just to confirm the design intent and the landscape intent. So those will all exist together. There will be a graded path. It will be accessible in terms of the ADA definition of accessibility to get to the playground.
And I know I missed one meeting, so we might have already covered it, but the playground itself, have we talked about that? Like, what is the construction? What is the ground? Is there grading there? Is it flatten out there? It's grades down to the playground, but then is it flat there?
It is flat there now. So there's a tapered slope, and we'd endeavor to build it on that flattened land that is adjacent to the BVW and within the 100-foot buffer. So in terms of, this is another one, the final design, obviously we have to do the final design for it. We anticipated including obviously a perimeter boundary, whether it's a plastic edging or a timber edging or something of that like to encapsulate the playground with a soft bedding material within that boundary for obviously fall protection for children.
So soft bedding being like the rubber mat, or soft bedding being mulch?
It could be like a mulch product.
Yeah, interested in more toward the final plan of that, because there's so, and then the maintenance plan and the size, I guess. I don't know if the size is on there. So many playgrounds so quickly, because kids are kids, right?
Sure.
They go from brand new to looking 25 years old in 6 months. So pieces can fall off, and they're made of plastic now, not usually compostable material. So I think that's probably further discussion, Brian.
Yeah, I was to say that it brought questions about it, and me too, because I realized I didn't, well, should have realized it wasn't on earlier plans either, because it is 100% within the 25-foot no touch. Like, were other areas considered? I'm looking over to the side of the building. Are there other areas that could be considered for that? Because again, that's a lot of sprawl with kids and trash and throwing rocks and kicking stuff. And really, that's the type of stuff we want to keep out of the 25-foot. We understood the need for the path, completely understand the ability to get around the building, but putting a playground in the 25-foot buffer zone is something we would 100% try to avoid, I would think. So is there an alternate analysis where it can't be placed someplace else on the site?
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may,
You may, but I'm just saying it's in the 25-foot, like,
Brian,
no touch.
yeah, that's what I wanted
Is
to clarify
the-
for you.
the red
Yeah,
is
please.
actually the 25, Brian.
Correct.
So
All
you're,
right, I
you're
got you, I
correct to
got
say
you.
it's within 100 feet.
I saw the
Um,
25-foot wetland buffer cutting across, it looked like.
Yes.
Right. The
Okay.
reason it was chosen in this location is it obviously works out from a grading perspective. It's actually in a green area of the site, which is where you would want a playground and a gathering space to be, as opposed to surrounded by pavement.
Sure.
The area had also previously been generally disturbed. The current well is here. I'm highlighting it. One of the current drinking water wells. That well is going to be decommissioned. So we actually targeted back here because it's actually adjacent to the wetland resource areas, because it's where we'd want a park or a playground to be, because there was already work done back there, because the grade work. So it was actually intentionally done. We certainly understand your concerns, trash, debris, make sure we're not throwing rocks into the wetlands, all of those elements, the bad seeds, if you will. I would ask you to consider that does become an operational discussion. This group, the
Sure.
applicants, they're not out to allow these folks to run rampant. If that were to become problematic, it's something that gets addressed right away. Similarly, it came up during our last hearing. It's touched upon lightly in the letter. We don't want blowing trash in the wetlands either. We know that we're close to some of these buffer zones, and you want to make sure that that debris is maintained outside of the resource area and the resource area buffers. We recognize that. We expect that if the commission is willing to issue an order here, you would narrate to that, saying, routine property maintenance to make sure trash is routinely removed from the site is accurately addressed. And we think the playground falls within that umbrella of sorts. While it's an encapsulated area, we understand your concerns about what might exist outside of the capsule, but that then falls under the trash and property management side of things.
Sure. No, and I understand that too. And thank you for putting it on the map, because again, to me, it looked like it was within the 25-foot, as I saw where that cut across, and I said, wait a minute. But I think Jillian had a lot of legitimate questions about materials used. Again, what that bedding is going to be. There's can be a big difference depending on what you use in there. And how big is it? I'm not seeing any dimensions. Is this a 40-foot by 40-foot play area? Is this a 80-foot by 80-foot play area? I mean, I guess I can kind of see relative to the building, but I think we'd kind of like to see dimensions on how much disturbed soil is going to need to have bedding down, what the circumference of the play area is, and then the calculations of that being disturbed soil within the buffer zone.
So
Or
we
permanently disturbed soil within the buffer zone. And I'm not sure that changes a ton of calculations, but that should all be factored in. And again, I think this is the first map we're seeing this on, or maybe I just missed it in the past.
I will say it has existed on all of the plans,
Okay.
because It's an element that was driven by the Zoning Board of Appeals to make sure we had some playground space available on site. So we've made sure we've
Sure.
carried it throughout this discussion. I can say the approximate area that we have there is about 25 by 30, in terms of what you're looking at within here, plus or minus. And that's subject to a little bit of variability because of the final design of the playground, what equipment is selected, slides, swings, things like that.
Sure. I think it would be good if we could get a circumference or square footage of the playground area will be no greater than X. In other words, to give them enough space to design ladder slides, all that good stuff, but to have a maximum amount of disturbed, either do it as a circumference or total square footage.
Understood. I'm going to do it in real time, so I can give you the number as we're talking, so that way we
I
can.
was going to say, depends on how quick you can do it, because we do have other things on the agenda
no, I
tonight,
understand.
and,
I'm-
it's been a long day already.
No problem at all. We'll
Okay.
continue on in our discussion, and I'm just going to do it while we're talking,
Okay,
and you'll see the number as it's produced on the screen, and we'll keep going.
all right. So I guess those are some of my questions, just following up on Jillian's questions. Other members of the commission have any questions, thoughts either about this or any other aspects of kind of the revisions we've seen tonight?
Yeah, I think there's still an open issue on what the de-icing material is. Do we want to try and land on that, or is that? I don't know what they use currently on site, or if it's part of the conditions that currently exist.
Say, Phil, do you know offhand what their current maintenance conditions are for? Yeah, I was going to say.
I don't.
Because and Jim, thanks for bringing this up, because you said, asked us about what we had done in the past, and we honestly haven't done projects like this in the past, really, ever. It's usually single family homes or two or three homes, and most of the time we just disallow any salt or sand altogether, which I understand is not really viable for this project. But generally speaking, we say no salt or sand within the resource areas. Hand de-icing and vehicle and that's about it.
But things like a calcium chloride would be acceptable, which is a salt alternative, and it's liquid. And
that's a good question. And again, I'd like to kind of hear Rebecca's thoughts on that and kind of look into that a little bit more to see exactly what it is, because again, I know things need to get used, and sometimes it's a question of if you're salting and sanding, are you then street sweeping basically, or if you're using sand, are you also reclaiming the sand? Are there catch basins for that? How exactly is that being done or being cleaned afterwards? Something along those lines. I'd kind of like to see what the plan would be. And again, I'll ask Rebecca on the calcium chloride too. I'm just not that familiar with the different methods. But thank you for initially answering that. Other comments or questions? And Jim, I think we'll have giving Rebecca a chance to weigh in might kind of answer your question a little bit more. I'm hopeful. But any other initial thoughts or comments, questions? All right. So Rebecca, I'd love to hear your thoughts or comments on anything we've just discussed.
Okay, I'll address the most recent question first. So Brian, I was shaking my head no in response to Phil regarding the last suggestion. I'm familiar with that material. I think it does work well. However, I was shaking my head no as to we had not allowed that, or the commission had not allowed that rather in the past within jurisdictional areas. So when, again, just referring back to what Brian's talking about resource areas, he's also talking about that 100-foot buffer. So he's talking about the jurisdictional area too. That being said, now obviously that is a significant portion of your parking area to the east. And then in addition to that, it has, I think, a portion of, if not half of the parking and access on the opposite side of building 4. So that all being said, I don't think it's up to the commission to decide what you can use or to suggest which treatment to use, but rather they can restrict no treatment within the jurisdictional areas or suggest that to you, and or they could suggest something. They could suggest a material. Typically we don't, similar to suggesting erosion and sediment controls. We really let the applicant define what they're suggesting, and then the commission respond, yes, that's a good method, or no. And there's obviously reasons behind that. Now, what I will say in the same note, though, is I have seen in other towns people using sand and using it and then having part of their operation and maintenance that there's manual removal within those buffer areas of anything built up. So essentially, you're containing what's there. It, of course, ends up on the roadside, the snow shelf, etc. But then manually, they have that part of their maintenance plan or with a vacuum truck, and they go up spring or between storms, or if there's a dry day, and clean that material up so it's not reaching those resource areas or further into the resource areas. So that's what I will say about that item. Regarding the playground, I'm happy that the commission has brought this up. It has been on plan since the beginning, but I will note again, similar to how the well was annotated on the plans, it's not clear that this is a new proposed area. Having been on site and familiar with the site, I'm aware that that does not exist there today. But regarding how your plans are formatted, you're showing that as almost an existing condition, whether you meant to or not. In addition, you don't include even though there's a break in the contour, your contour should carry to the playground, and or you should include a stone dust or paved route to the playground to make it very clear that that is going to be occurring within jurisdictional area to the commission, and that has not been done as of yet. So I would suggest to the commission that you request that. So making sure that all the infrastructure and the pathways to access such infrastructure are incorporated on the plans as a proposed element versus a shading that is perceived to be existing conditions. Then I think it's important to know the material. Jillian already highlighted that, so I won't go down that pathway. I think the perimeter extent that Brian was talking about, not to exceed X, I think that's a very good approach to addressing that and even considering conditioning that area. I will say I am familiar. I do know what area it is. It is currently lawn around the well. If that well infrastructure is being removed as part of the decommissioning of that well, I think there is an ability to potentially reconfigure the way that that playground is laid out on site, maybe making it a little bit more linear to actually shift it further away from jurisdictional areas. Now, I'm not an architect, I'm not a designer, but that's just from looking at the plans, what's there today versus what you expressed as what you want that area to provide, while also being sensitive of the resource areas. I think that's a reasonable approach. The split rail fencing question regarding the snow storage removal. Well, so two things. The fencing around more sensitive or jurisdictional areas. I think that's a great approach regarding the split rail fencing. What I would suggest to the commission is if they are considering conditioning the project in the future, that they not exclude snow fencing, but incorporate into a condition that you're explicitly withholding the ability to require snow fencing. And essentially we'll see how it goes. And if it's not functioning the way it needs to, snow fencing may be required, because that would mean that there's some sort of impact to the resource area. And therefore we need to really highlight that. And I think your maintenance, whoever's in charge of the property in the future, again, if it's conditioned, would find that reasonable. Stockpiling, I agree. I think carrying over the operation and maintenance items from the past item that was recently, the order of conditions that was recently passed related to the beaver activity would be relevant. However, stockpiling in relation to snow or removing snow, there needs to be something written that's not as general as not within jurisdictional areas. That either says that if there's stockpiling, that it's removed from site or directed towards the front of the site, and explicitly putting that on the plans. I appreciate that you've done the shelf there, but the truth of the matter is some years we get a lot of snow and some years we get none, or barely any, not none, obviously. So I think that's reasonable. And you have significant area to the north, some area to the west where you could be identifying that as well, without a significant lift. The other items that I had some comments on was in relation to the irrigation lines. It sounded, Phil, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you did include and you were anticipating putting in or trenching, putting in the sleeves so that any of the irrigation within jurisdictional areas, that infrastructure is already there as part of this plan, and you just simply slip lining it, basically.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. The other, talking about existing, I appreciate you included the dry hydrant spec, which is, or not spec, diagram. But as far as work I have seen within ponds in town or even culverts, sometimes you hit some interesting areas. Sometimes it takes dewatering, sometimes it takes cofferdams. All of that, I think the commission should be requiring you to provide a plan for now, because the other opportunity would be, and the reason I say that is because it's my understanding that you need the access to the fire pond as or directly after structures are built. So unless you can build that dry hydrant first and then be providing it, otherwise I would say do it under a new notice of intent, because that's what we require people to do. We even require the fire department to do that now. If they're replacing, and they have to tell us where it's going, how it's being installed, how they're dewatering. And I think all of that information is necessary because you're impacting a resource area directly, even in a relatively temporary manner, so that you can get that small pipe in the ground. And that being said, there's maintenance associated with that dry hydrant. So that needs to be included as well. The fire department probably has some sort of general language that they might be able to provide you, but the end of that pipe sometimes gets clogged. So they have to do some removal of material there. And that needs to be included as well. Is that you doing that? Is it the fire department? And then the location of where that's going to go to connect to the dry hydrant. So basically through the jurisdictional area, where is that trenching going to occur? And that should be part of this plan as well, unless you were going to do it under a different notice of intent. Then I believe my last item, unless I'm missing something, but my last item was specific to the landscaping plan. So I do really appreciate you providing that information. It was very helpful. However, my other note was related to areas that are within the jurisdictional area that you may be mowing. I know Jillian mentioned the playground, so I'll highlight again how you're maintaining that. Are you going to be continuing to mow the area where the well used to be, where you're proposing the playground? Is that going to be allowed to grow as meadow outside of the playground perimeter? Those are the other insights that are necessary for the commission to consider as part of how this project is going to be conditioned, if it's going to be conditioned. And I appreciate you noting the discharge change in terms of the location. That was helpful. And confirming public safety access. And I did share that email from Chief Legendre. So those are all my comments for right now, Brian. I would echo too, that I believe Paul at the last meeting had brought up the runoff from the roof on building 4 and it potentially being redirected. I think there was mention of like a dry hydrant or just redirecting it to the western side or eastern side of the building to again allow for more time for it to filtrate before it gets into the BVW or the pond or the BVW adjacent to the pond.
Thank you. All right. I was to say, I'll ask Phil some questions on this, but just after hearing from Rebecca, any questions or comments from members of the commission? Not seeing any right now. Is there anybody here from the public tonight to comment on this particular project? Seeing it right now. All right. So Phil, just some of the points that Rebecca brought up. Would it be possible to get a new map that basically shows all that, the infrastructure plus the walkway, what the actual changed elements are versus what is not being on there? And along with that, you know, some of our comments regarding the playground where we did see you were kind of doing what the circumference would be, but again, that's something we could possibly add in. But if you're going to be regrading that anyways, just to kind of include that maximum possible circumference for it, and how what the maintenance is going to be on that. You know, and I'll be curious if you're amenable. I like the idea that Rebecca had regarding the snow fencing, basically saying we'll see how it goes, that we kind of reserve the right to require it, but you know, if everything can be maintained without it, we're happy not to see it as well. Yeah, talk about some of the and again, some, you know, I still have questions about the irrigation, but especially with the dry hydrant for the fire department. Rebecca makes a good point where if it needs to be in at the beginning of the project, you know, I'd kind of like to see a final plan for how that's going to be done. That is going to be significantly invasive. And I know it can be done right, but usually that's a plan we would approve and see. Or as you were saying, Rebecca, and I'm not sure how it would work if it's something we would just require via its own separate NOI, you know, carving out of this, but I think it kind of needs to be part of this. I'm not sure, but I kind of would like to see those plans. And again, you know, I think we can work on the irrigation part. But you know, it just made me realize questions with, you know, with the playground being within the 100-foot buffer zone, like, do we want to see that area watered? I mean, it's going to need to be watered. You know, where do the pipes run? You know, watering in the buffer zone is not exactly what we want to do ideally. I know we need for parts of maintaining the lawn and everything. You know, I think we could try to put limitations on what the irrigation can or can't do, or just say that we would need to approve it. But it looks like we really would need to see a final plan more for the dry hydrant. Those are some of what I had jotted down, just going off of Rebecca's questions and hearing some other people's questions. Do you think that would be possible, or are there any of those issues you want to address?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one quick issue that it sounds like it could turn into a much larger issue, and we certainly don't want that to happen, is the dry hydrant. So obviously your agent is correct. You know, the scope of the actual dry hydrant, the work to install that is key and it's critical. And I don't know that we could provide it sounds like there might be a disconnect between the level of detail that you might be made comfortable with and what we can provide at this stage without knowing the final detailing with the contractor, as I mentioned before. So if something like that has to be deferred to a later time, I would rather do that than this is obviously a very important project for us. We hope it's a very important project for the town. I would rather not hold up this project on the installation methods for a 6-inch PVC pipe, quite frankly. The The timing of,
The pipe is small, the area is extremely sensitive that you're tunneling into. I mean, you said, well, we're gonna be in the wetland. Yeah, you're gonna be in the water. All right, so let's not
yes.
try to minimize it too much. It's significant. That's usually why we see plans ahead of time. You know, and I'm sure there's, I'm not sure, I don't know what the cost would be. I would think you'd want to know that cost ahead of time too. But go ahead with what you were saying.
I
Mr.
don't,
Chair, if you would like, I can provide a little bit, maybe clarification of what I'm suggesting in terms of more detail,
Sure.
because that might be helpful.
That might,
or-
yeah, I was
or
gonna say
not.
that might help.
So at times, again, as Brian mentioned, we typically approve dry hydrant installations, at least over the past couple of years, because DEP has said, no, they need to go under notice of intent, even upgrades to them, even maintenance of those dry hydrants, it has to go through a notice of intent. So that's why I'm suggesting that, which is very reasonable. Because of that, we already know DEP requires this. We already experience that every year, anytime we get the maintenance plans. Now, what I'm referring to when I'm talking about the level of detail, the location of the line for the dry hydrant. So I believe, unless I'm recalling the plans incorrectly, the dry hydrant connection point in terms of where the vehicles would be pulling from is outside of or at the edge of the jurisdictional area, right? So I understand that may be altered depending on, but again, can be altered outside of the jurisdiction of the commission. If there's an amendment that needs to be done after the fact. What I'm referring to, and Mr. Chair can obviously, and the commission can speak differently as far as what they're requiring, but what I'm talking about is the area within the jurisdictional location. So within that buffer, the line that is running and the pipe that's running to that area outside of the jurisdictional area, to the area that is in the pond and submerged in the pond, trenched or dredged into the pond, and then the area within the pond itself and how that is going to be installed. Again, you can reach out for orders of magnitude. I've seen it done before, talk to the fire department. How has this been installed? This isn't an out of the question ask for that information. And then you have the ability, just like our other conditions, to, if this project is conditioned, because I can't say one way or another because the commission has not made any sort of a vote. They're still discussing it with the different methods. So in terms of boundary marking, we give the opportunity, the commission typically gives the opportunity of boulder, split rail fence, or something else, or signage, right? So if there's a method to be used for dewatering, for example, these are the methods to be used, the 3 top methods that are typically used. You have to follow up with the conservation agent prior to installation, but you've still already presented us with those 3 specs, those 3 options. So it's not saying it's only in a condition. You've shown us and you've given us specs that show each of those options, we'll say. But again, the location of the way that that pipe is directed through the property, that should not be changing. And that is something you'd be able to show on plans. So that's what I'm referring to. Of course, we want the full thing where everything is going, how it's going to be done. But in terms of what I'm referring to and what I mentioned before, that's what I'm talking about. And I don't think that's something that significantly puts off your timeline. If you want to come back with a notice of intent for this specific aspect, I think that's another good opportunity as well. But I also understand that that's part of your fire protection and calculation in this project, to my understanding. So I would note that back to the chair and Phil, but I just wanted to provide that clarification in case it was misunderstood.
Yeah, I think I understand you, Rebecca. I'm hoping I do. So I'm curious then, like, well, is it? I'm trying to think how we could condition it, but basically we'd be basically looking to hear back with possible options, or basically an extent of options that they would use when, putting in the final project, and including basically line location capacity. the known knowns that you can have while still giving yourself flexibility for an engineering company to come in and say, we want to do it this way, and this is how we want to stop the water flow temporarily. And does that make sense, Phil? Do you think that would be something doable? It kind of gives more flexibility, but still kind of gives us a broad definition of what will happen in there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we don't have an issue with that. I guess
Okay.
As a sort of a counter argument, just to understand the full breadth of it, we can provide detailing of methods of installation, but does the commission feel that we'd basically give you the menu, and then once we get the contractor on board, they're going to have additional detail? Would we still be required to come back in front of this commission with that additional detail or clarifying detail? I mean, we'd endeavor now to make it as accurate as possible, but we can't cover any and all methodologies right now, and would want the contractor to weigh in on it. So is it a situation where even if we did it now and gave you good information, we'd still be coming back? In which case, what I would do is say, well, I'll just come back and give you everything all at once on that specific aspect only.
It's, I'll ask other commission members too, but, for me, we want the specifics from anybody else who's putting in a dry hydrant or doing any work in the wetlands. Yeah, we want the specifics from the contractor, or at least we want to know it's going to be one of these X methods and we won't do X, Y, or Z. I mean, generally, that's what we ask of everybody in town. I don't see why we would not this time. And again, I have no reason to try to slow anything down, but yeah, usually we'll want to see that detail. But I'll let me open it up to other members of the commission. Your thoughts, comments, questions? Not saying.
No, I agree. We should see the plan. Agreed.
Do you think that's something that would be possible? And again, I think, and Rebecca, I'd love for you to weigh in on this too, because I think you had mentioned earlier when we were talking about it, just saying, it has to be approved, or it has to be at least submitted to the conservation agent before you begin. We'd probably want something at least along those lines, where, we definitely want to see what the final plans are. I mean, we want to see the plans in advance, but we definitely want to weigh in on it. Just curious, Rebecca, your thoughts, if there's a way you've seen this done, if you see the best way for us to go ahead.
I related back to, and for clarification, I don't think the commission's looking for 10 ways to do this. That's not the case. And Brian, to your point, what I'm comparing it to in terms of how the commission has approached things like this in the past regarding trying to make some sort of a parallel is with the boundary markers, right? So you try to memorialize, you give an option of a sign, a split rail fence, or boulders, but the location of where that's going to occur is agreed upon during the public meeting process, the public hearing process. So I think that would be one approach if the commission wanted to entertain that, is here's the extent of the area if dewatering is necessary, which it's going to be, where that extent will be. And obviously the contractor will, when you hire a contractor, it has to be within the order of conditions, within that approved scope of work by the commission. So by providing the commission already with those top 3 opportunities or ways in which you're approaching this, or in ways in which you see contracted parties approach this, or the fire department, whoever your source is, then that means that when you hire someone, they know they have these 3, the ability within these 3 to do that work and get it accomplished. So at that point, you submit, this is the one that the contractor has, this is what we're looking to carry out, because the location of everything's already been approved in terms of the scope and method. It's just you have a couple different methods that have been approved by the commission under the circumstances. So then, to my understanding, you would still send that to the commission. So if the commission wants to put it on me, they can put it on me. That's fine. I work for them. But they also have the ability to say you need to submit it to the commission and the commission will review during a public meeting. Now, that's not to say it has to open a public hearing again. That's not, but it has to happen during the public meeting, during a public meeting. So that you've given them the three, they'll say, yes, this is what we're comfortable with. It's documented, it's been approved, there's no problem or issue. So that's the way I could see it going in terms of going back to the commission. Otherwise, if you're not choosing to do that method, I would say it'd have to be a new notice of intent for this scope of work.
All right.
And that,
Go ahead,
that
Phil.
I'm sorry, that makes sense. That's the clarification that I was seeking, is that we would give to you the final detailed plan at the discretion of this commission, whether or not your agent reviews it on your behalf or whether it comes back in front of you at a public meeting. I was just trying to lay out what the next steps could potentially be as to whether we decide to delay it in the interest of additional information, or give you that information now, and we'll come back sort of more informally down the line.
Yeah.
Is what I'm getting at, which I think
Mr. Chair,
is doable.
To be
Go ahead.
clear, I am suggesting to provide plans for each
Yeah.
of those options now, and then in the future, it would be, this is the method, this is specifically what we're going with. Just to be clear, because if you're showing a scope or a model of what's being installed there, but not showing the exact location of where it's going to be or limit of work associated with it, then it's really, again, you're sort of making it contingent approval where the commission should really have the location of what's being done, those three options that they're going to review and say, yes, this is an appropriate way to approach this, and a relative detail spec specific to each of those options in terms of what would be used and where within the resource areas. And then the final is, this is the final plan that we went with. But I just want to make that clear that there is, what I'm suggesting is that there is a set of plans, or at least a set of specifics and engineered drawing that comes with those options as well. So then it's easy for the commission following up to say, yes, this is the one that you're going with. That's fine. There's no significant changes. We already know the location.
Right. And just to clarify on the point, location is already on the drawings. The scope of what we need to do, we already have. It's the additional detailing to facilitate the installation of the pipe. So it sounds like out of the three things that your agent just mentioned, we are short on one of them and the specifications associated with it.
Yep. And then any location regarding limit of work within the pond, which is not shown yet on the plans, limit of work that would be addressed during that time.
Right. But we to that point also do have limit of work, which is how I was able to provide those areas. We know about what that limitation is going to be. I think the biggest thing that maybe is not fully described is whether there's the use of the coffer dams or dewatering that are used. I think really that's probably what it comes down to, quite frankly, at the end of the day. But we can work to provide you that detail. We just want to be giving you as much information as you need at this point within the tools that we have, and the team that we have assembled at this point, knowing we have many more steps to go with additional contractors and additional involvement. And we can certainly define the scope of something. And then when we get to the contractor stages, they say, no, here's a better way to do this. Have we opened ourselves up to a disconnect between the permits? And that's what I'm looking out for at the end of the day. So in any event, we can, I think on our side, we can go round and round on it. We can work to give you some additional detailing on that. What I'm hearing is the playground and the installation of the piping within the fire pond really are the two takeaway issues. I don't want to shortcut the discussion or at all overlook anything.
That's fine. I'll ask commission members, but yeah, no, I think when it came to some of the other things, like again, the irrigation, I think we can kind of set limits on that one. I understand you won't have a contractor right away. The snow removal, I think, as you proposed in your letter and discussed, I thought was fine. I'm trying to think if there was any other outstanding issues other than those two.
The
I don't,
de-icing too, Brian.
yeah, what a plan for that was. Yeah, what material would, and I know it has to go with the maintenance plan, but what materials will be used and how they'll be cleaned or not cleaned.
So to answer that question, I guess to spur the discussion, and Rebecca laid it out to say, the commission's not here to tell us what to do. We're here to propose something and
Sure.
you obviously decide. So to put that foot forward, we'd obviously request no restrictions on snow management, de-icing. We would want to use traditional methodology, which is application of sand, application of salt, and a pre-treatment mix of both of those. So that's industry-wide, that's economic for us, that's most feasible for us. Most contractors are very familiar with that. It's readily available materials. So just so that's completely laid out and starts the discussion, or maybe even ends it, that's what we would seek to do. The reason I wrote it the way we did in our letter is I heard at the last meeting the sensitivities about snow. So I maybe falsely took away an impression that you clearly have interests, but whether or not you have defined specified interests maybe seems to be the loose end on it. So unless the commission would think otherwise, we would just want to use sands and salts, just like you would for any roadway maintenance-based site. It's effective. Obviously, the use of sand entails more handling for our stormwater systems, but that's why the stormwater system has an O&M. We need to clean the catch basins, the water quality, the outfalls. That all gets enveloped. You already have that detailing. So that's what we would try to do here.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. But I could see, especially in resource areas, salt and sand cleanup. Do you have the street sweepers? Is it, X times a year it gets swept, X amount of times a year the catch basins get cleared? Is that in the OMB?
It is. It's in the O&M.
All right. Other commission members have thoughts regarding that, particularly with salt sanding treatment, basically pavement treatment?
So Brian, just so when we say that, we're talking about salt and sand outside of the resource areas, correct? Is that the underlying assumption? Or is
I'm
it
assuming
salt and
it's all the
sand
paved
everywhere?
surfaces, even if they are in the resource area. I think it's all paved surfaces regardless of where they are, but I'll let Phil answer.
I am referring to the site in total, no distinction between resource area buffers or non-resource area buffers. We would use one management practice for the site.
And it would be for the walkways as well, correct, Phil?
Yes, because walkways, obviously for slip and falls, those certainly need to be treated.
Right. Other comments, questions regarding that? Excuse me. Any members of the public have any comments or questions on anything we've discussed recently? Seeing none. So I would say, Phil, when it comes to that, if you can just kind of memorialize that, what you're planning to do for treatment. And again, if it's salt and sand, it's just salt and sand. It's not the calcium chloride or anything else like that. It didn't seem like there were any massive objections, or I'm not sure if we know of a more convenient way. It's a good point with the walkways, especially the stuff in the buffer zone. Just not sure ways in which we could condition that to make it any less deadly for those buffer zone areas, because it is. But yeah, as I say, nothing from the public, and I can't think of anything else off of hand.
Okay. We will take the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to memorialize that on the plans, as
Okay.
well as your agent's recommendation about the snow removal, memorialize that on the plans as well, in keeping with the letter, just so it exists within the confines of the plan documents as suggested.
Okay. So I guess basically just those first two things, and then if you were able to do that, I don't think there's anything else anyone is looking for this evening. Additional questions from either Rebecca or members of the commission?
Is it possible to get a copy of what the existing conditions are in the existing building?
Through the chair, clarify what's happening in the building? Is that what you asked?
No, so there's existing conditions that are in perpetuity for the current.
Oh.
Right, so do we have a list of what those conditions are?
Yeah, we're the ones who issued those, Jim, so I can certainly send that to you,
Okay.
but
thank-
it's not I would have to double check. I don't believe it's relevant to snow removal or snow or treatment, if that's what you were looking for. So that would be a request to Phil if you were looking for what they're currently treating with or how they're approaching that, to be reaching out to the property owner.
Yeah, it wasn't anything specific. It was just what are the current conditions that are on the property line?
So just to be clear, from my to-do list, it sounds like that's more of your agent is going to get you the current order of conditions. Okay.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
That's all I'm seeing. All right. Rebecca, remind me if you would, the date of our next meeting?
It is next Tuesday, December 6th.
Wow. Wow, it
Well-
really is.
And the first time slot is 7:45.
So Phil, do you think you would be able to get those in time that we could just put you on again next week and try to hopefully issue an order at that point?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Here,
Rebecca, do you think you would have, I mean, how much, I was to say, we have it as an open, ongoing discussion, so you wouldn't need anything additional for them as far as posting time, as long as they're on the, agenda, right?
Yeah, so I can definitely put them on the agenda. I post the agendas typically Thursday afternoon, but the submittal deadline is Thursday at noon. So as long as the applicant can meet that deadline, I am happy to include them on the agenda. If not, the next agenda, the next public meeting is December 20th. And you would be on at 7 o'clock on the 20th.
with due respect, would love to spend Christmas time with you,
Yeah.
but we would like to take the opportunity for next week. Hearing the commentary tonight and what you're seeking, I think we can provide it, have it to you by Thursday, and have a good discussion next week.
Excellent. Okay. And in that case, I'd like to make a motion that we continue the public hearing for 580 Main Street until our next public meeting, Tuesday, December 6th at 7:45 PM. Do I hear a second for that?
Second,
All right. All those in favor, starting with Paul,
Aye.
Jim,
aye.
Jillian,
Aye.
and Rebecca, I am an I as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you. We'll see you next week. All right. Rebecca, are you ready to continue? All right. The Bolton Conservation Commission will now continue the public hearing under Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40. To consider a notice of intent for South Bolton Road, proposed Mallard Lane, DEP file number 112-0717. As I say, Rebecca, is the applicant or representative for the applicant here this evening?
They are, and if you would like, Brian, they can certainly provide a brief update. They did submit some revised information between last meeting and today, so I would be happy to hand it over to them.
That would be excellent. Jim, would you be able to give a quick update on the revisions?
Yes, for the record, my name is Jim Warren, representing Mallard Lane, the applicant of Mallard Lane. What the commission had asked me to do previously was to move some stuff out of the buffer zone that was behind Unit 8. So we ended up moving the well outside the buffer zone, the propane tank outside the buffer zone, and some of the drainage swale, what was in the buffer zone and directly behind Unit 8, it's now to the side of Unit 8.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's nothing in the buffer zone behind unit 8 anymore.
Yep, and it's on the official. We have the stamp products. Yes.
Yep.
Right. Rebecca, did you have any comments, questions, or thoughts regarding the revisions?
I did not at this time. I did reach out to Jim via email. We corresponded earlier today, just regarding some additional information regarding the landscaping plan. And I believe he heard basically what some of those concerns were between the last hearing that he just sat through, and then also the correspondence that we had. And in terms of what's on the roadway, snow removal, I did note that in the O&M, it did talk about snow removal, but more in a general term. And same thing with some of the other items. It was more general. Jim did note that Homeowners Association would be maintaining it, which is helpful to know, but the commission may be looking for a little bit more information on where snow removal would be. Is it stored on site? Is it taken off site if stockpiling does occur? And then just items associated with any mowing. Are things going to be left to grow into meadow-like structure regarding, instead of a lawn, shorter? Jim did provide a landscaping plan in the original. However, again, just I had highlighted that. I appreciated that, but there was a little bit more information too that we were looking for.
Thank you.
I'll talk on that a little bit.
I was going to say, Jim, would you be able to
Yeah.
provide that level of detail? Or go ahead.
Well, to the point where I think it's necessary. Like if you look at the graded areas along the roadway, that is going to be like a meadow seed mix, and to let it grow naturally. There'll be no irrigation in and around that area at all. Then the other question was if around these units, it's projected to be roughly 20% lawn, 20 feet around the unit as lawn. And each unit is supplied by its own well, and it will have its own irrigation system. So other than that, that would be it. We did cover the, I forget what sheet it's on, but it was submitted to the commission under the sheets for the snow storage and so on. Rebecca, do you know what sheet that's on? Because we had to do that for the zoning board of.
If you give me 1 minute, I will try and grab that.
Okay. Because that was a question they had, where would we be storing the snow? And it was to go on site. There is, once we went down to 8 units, there is some open space along the roads.
I might give everyone whiplash, so I apologize.
That's all
But
right.
But that's.
No, that's stockpiling during construction. Do you
Yeah.
know where you had it annotated?
Yeah, it
on
was,
the plans, Jim?
if you're coming in Mallard Lane, it was to the right. It was to be plowed and stored to the right side of the road.
On the septic system?
Well, it won't go on the septic system.
No, but I mean
There's a
adjacent.
distance on that side, yes. So in where that planting area is, so that whole shoulder of the road would be storage. In beside units 2 and 3 was a big storage area for snow. And the other area I recall is between like the septic system and unit 2, that whole area would be storage for snow. So it was definitely outside the buffer zone as best we could.
I was gonna say we could, right, if it's not already on there, Rebecca, we could condition, right, that any snow storage or snow piling be done outside of the buffer zones, resource area and resource area buffer
Yep.
zones. Right, and that should cover us, and that should also leave you with plenty of land where you can store that it shouldn't affect, hopefully.
Right.
All right. Other commission members have questions or comments on anything we've just been talking about, or any of Rebecca's observations? All right. Any members of the public here tonight to comment on this particular hearing?
I see none at this time.
All right. I was gonna say, Rebecca, I know you had brought up with basically snow storage, and then of course salting and sanding. I don't think we, had anything on that. I think the operation maintenance plan would be that usual, that salt or sand or a mix of the two could be used, but should be. I shouldn't say, that's a hard one to condition the right way. And again, it's difficult with it being multiple homes. I know for safety reasons, they need to use a basic approach to
I
it.
think the stormwater system, if you want to look at that detail, it is meant to cleanse anything we use, such as sands and salt.
Recapture.
So all the stormwater does get gathered on the site. And it's kind of a state-of-the-art system. If you look at the detail section, like underneath the color sack, there's rows of these plastic chambers, and the first row is wrapped in fabric, and it's to take out any of the impurities that you would gather in the road. And this is all covered on the O&M. And if you look at this detention pond here, there's a forebay where the silts will be taken out. So those measurements came up through the ZBA, and that's how we decided to deal with it, that all the sheet flow on this entire site does get gathered and pre-treated before it's left to go, off-site. It isn't like any part of the site, pre and post development would leave without being pre-treated.
Go ahead, Rebecca, did you have a comment on that?
Yes, I guess the area, and I do have to agree that the basin area, the infiltration system, a lot of that I have no problem with. And I don't think when I'm looking at this plan, I'm concerned with that relative to how it's being treated. What I'm concerned with is the area adjacent to the vernal pool. And within that vernal pool habitat, 100-foot area, is when you're plowing, your blade's obviously pushing some off to the side, regardless whether or not you're meaning to, but that's simply how a plow functions. So you have your split rail fence there, which is good. So you're not going to have anyone accidentally pushing over because you're going to annihilate the fence there. But you have a slope into the resource area. So I guess that's the area I'm concerned with. And that's the area regarding any treatment that's being used on site ending up there. And regarding vernal pools, I would say refrain from salt because of the inhabitants there. But that would be my suggestion. I don't know how the commission feels or what the applicant's thoughts are on that.
I can speak a little
ahead,
bit on
Jim.
that. I know on this roadway, as if you look at the drainage design, there will be curbing, so as the snow melts and the water gets down there, we physically we'll be able to capture then those impurities. But as the plow's going down the road, what goes over the guardrail, I think would be minimum for that small section that's in the buffer zone to the vernal pool. Again, we're to leave that to grow and to so on. I know that grasses and stuff are a good way to pre-treat any kind of runoff. But during the winter, what do we have for growth, that kind of thing. But I think that the curbing would really help, as the snow melts and the salt and the sand go down the edge of the road and then go into the catch basin, and then there's maintenance through the forebay down below. I think that definitely helps. But do I see a large amount of impurities, sands and salts while we plow? Typically, no, especially shooting over the guardrail and getting into that area. I guess some could get by. I don't know basically what amount, but usually when you put the sand and salt down, it melts and gets into the curb and goes down the curb. So that's what we hope to do,
Right. I was gonna say, I'm trying to think if we could, for safety reasons, all that good stuff, if it's possible to limit it to just sand for treatment, for ice treatment, but that's a difficult one.
Well, there is a sidewalk there
there's-
too.
I think there's two items, Brian, and I believe our DPW might do this, and that's the pre-treatment and then during a storm. And obviously if you're pre-treating, it's reducing what's happening there, or the need to continuously treat. So, and I agree with the curbing in relation to any sort of pre-treatment, because at that point you're getting the melt and then it's pushing whatever is on there, whether it's infiltrating, if it makes its way over, or it's hitting the curb and continuing down the way it should be captured. And in that note, if you're pre-treating, you shouldn't be plowing up pre-treatment that's going over into the more sensitive area. What I'm concerned with is continual treating, not doing a pre-treatment, and that where you have material under it, material over it, and now you're just basically compressing it. And that's like when you drive down the side of the road and it's just dirt and all kinds of things in the snowbank. And obviously it's dirt from the roadway too, but it's sand, salt treatment. And that's what I'm trying to avoid, again, getting into that vernal pool and the adjacent areas. So I don't know if the commission wants to condition something. I'm not sure the suggestion on that, other than separating it as pre-treatment as well. I'm not really sure how to approach it, but that's how I would break out my concern for that jurisdictional area.
It's a difficult one. Yeah. And I was trying to think if it's something, and again, is it even feasible to condition to say, look, a pre-treatment of salt and or sand is allowed, but a continual treatment from that point on should be sand only.
Yeah, I have no
Is that
problem.
Feasible? Yeah.
Well, what I was thinking, and I up by the Wachusett Reservoir, I saw these reflectors that say be careful, because when the reflectors show blue, that means that area is not maintained at all, other than plowed. So I have no problem posting on the guardrail area that sensitive area, saying sand only or limited, whatever the commission would want me to say, and nice metal signs that would get placated to the guardrail in that section, just to let people know that it is a sensitive area and that caution should be used, definitely in this area. I know they did that up around the Wachusett Reservoir. You go by the Clinton Courthouse, there's a roadway section, and it just caught my eye one day. They use some blue reflectors to let drivers know in that section of the road that it's a freezing temperature and it's not been treated. I found that pretty interesting how they did that.
It's interesting. It looks like we have a question from a member of the public, if that's all right.
Yep.
Rebecca, could you let Brittany Bethune in?
Hi there. Yes, this is Christopher Hoyt and my wife, Brittany Bethune. We're at 342 South Bolton. We're at a direct abutter. I don't want to belabor, extend this on or not. Obviously, the conversation about the vernal pool and the snow removal in that area. I just also want to, the entrance is also a secondary area because it is within the 100-foot buffer. So the same conversation over in that area as well. So that's all I just wanted to discuss, because similarly, I don't want the runoff at the entrance there with whatever salt, all that going, because across the street is also, so that's all. So
Appreciate it. It's a really good point, that we haven't really discussed that other area as much too. And it is a very sensitive area as you go directly across the street.
Yeah, if I could
Go
just
ahead,
speak
Jim.
on that. So the town has improved that area currently, as we saw in our site visit. So there's a catch basin there that the town maintains. So that last bit of our road ties into that catch basin. It goes through that large riprap, goes into the beehive. And in there, the town could maintain, because that takes everything off of South Bolton Road also. So there's just a small section of the entrance of Mallard Lane that falls under that jurisdiction of that beehive. That's how that would get maintained for that area. I mean, what does the town use on South Bolton Road right there? Do you know? I'd be curious.
You could certainly reach out to DPW. I don't have the answer to that question. Like I said, I do know, at least the last discussion I had is that they had been focusing on doing more pre-treatment to reduce the need for more material being used. So that's why I'm sort of echoing that approach, because it seems to be fairly successful, but that would be a question for DPW, and I'd welcome you to reach out to the director and ask that question.
Okay, I do like what Rebecca's saying about pre-treatment, and I would agree if the commission wanted to put that in there in the conditions. I think that is an excellent way to handle those kind of concerns, because if somebody doesn't do pre-treatment and it ices up, and then they're pushing ice, and that can put impurities up over the curb, like Rebecca was saying. So I really like the idea of the pre-treatment and making that a condition and saying, whoever lives here and who's ever responsible, this homeowners association, landscaping contractor, or whatever you want to call them, that they have to agree that they have to do the proper amount of pre-treatment.
Yep, and I think, Mr. Chair, what the applicant had brought up about some of the signage and to not be treating in certain areas, or pre-treat only and plowing during the storm. I think things like that and conditions like that can also reduce impact to those jurisdictional areas, both areas. So, and I have seen what he's referring to regarding the signs around the reservoir. And, it's drivable. You just have to be more cautious during the middle of the storm, which you shouldn't be out in anyway.
Right. Were there other members of the public that had questions, comments? Just thinking through, I don't see any. All right. So trying to think, where does it leave us with this? That we could basically condition that the pavement, that for the maintenance of for the maintenance of the pavement, especially during storms, that they can be maintained, that salt and sand can be used as a pre-treatment only, and that any continual treatment should be done sand only.
Yes.
And also that any stockpiling of snow be done outside the resource areas and the buffer zones. It's that kind of where we had gotten to on those, because I'm thinking, Rebecca, there was also a question about some of the plantings, and I had forgotten what you had said about planting plans.
So the planting plans were, my past comment was related to incorporating native species within the planting plan, as far as where the shrubs and trees were planted, which may echo what already exists on the plan. But then in terms of maintenance of areas around the units and associated with just whether it be mowing or removal of vegetation, what that might look like and it sounded like because of the limited area, it will be maintained as lawn, and then areas shown as slope will be allowed to grow and not be maintained as lawn. So more of a native grass herbaceous like layer. The other, just to back up to note, and it didn't sound like any of the commission members had commented on it, but the other option for the snow was pre-treat and then no treatment during the storm, just plowing. So that was the other option, but it sounded less favorable to who had made comments so far.
All right. Any commission members have comments or questions regarding anything Rebecca had just walked through? All right. I'm trying to think, Rebecca, is there a way that we could easily condition those native plantings, that in certain area native plants be considered for landscaping purposes?
Yes,
Is that,
I think that's sufficient.
Yeah.
Just taking out the could be considered.
well, I was going to say, if we were to draft an order, if I would say as that native plantings be used in areas as discussed and outlined at this evening's meeting, would that be sufficient?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. And then as far as the pre-treating and or sanding, commission members, your thoughts, pre-treating only, pre-treating or sanding, and sanding allowed throughout? Strong thoughts, feelings one way or the other?
I would go with pre-treatment and sanding only would be my suggestion.
All right. Rebecca, if in theory we were to close this hearing and vote on the order this evening, those are the only two additional conditions I have noted down here to put in. Basically is the salting, sanding of the driveway and the use of native plantings. Is there anything else that we would be missing?
I would specify something about snow storage. I know it was stated that it was on the plans, but not having it pinpointed in front of me. I think just establishing that it's to be stored outside of the jurisdictional area.
Yep.
And then the other question or condition potentially for the commission that is not yet in the draft document is, because it is a vernal pool, is there any, and now Natural Heritage did not put any limitations on the site regarding their conditions, but does the commission have any conditions relative to construction or putting up? I know sometimes there's migratory boundaries, basically, where you put silt fence so that the species go up to and then go along it and around. On this site, they really can't go around. They'd be coming across the site. So that being said, I don't even know if that's relevant, but I figured I would bring it up for the commission. Typically, we see big migrations come March for the various amphibians and species that utilize vernal pools. So that's basically what I'm thinking of, just in terms of when, if the commission is considering, which it sounds like they are, conditioning the project, how that basically would direct the applicant in terms of how they would be providing their construction sequence in the future. So when they can start, or is there a pause during construction because of that activity that's going on site? As we know, sometimes species don't even use a pool because they migrate and they may switch off on what pools they're using over time. So all of that, I don't know if you want to condition something and or just remain silent on that item.
I wouldn't be sure how to all the points you bring up are good. I'm just trying to think how it's a viable way that we can write that. And it's difficult to do a pause in a construction schedule. I'm sure we don't even have a construction schedule yet. It plays, again, it's an important resource area, but it is that one isolated pool that they may or may not use, depending on what amphibians are using it, their ability to get there. I'm not sure how we would attempt to condition that, and I'm just curious if other commission members have thoughts around that.
Could I speak on that for a moment?
Jim, please.
So it was classified as a vernal pool, and fairy tale shrimp, that was the species that I was told that they found there, and they don't migrate.
Yeah.
So
It was fairy shrimp and spotted salamander eggs is what I I've been
Spotted
told,
salamander is the
so-
big nightmare,
Okay.
yeah.
I was told by them that it was the shrimp. So
Okay.
Did they change what they found there? Do you know?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't know
Okay.
when you were told this information, but
From
That is what I-
Westboro Natural Heritage.
so that is what I was told.
Okay,
Either way, it is a vernal pool.
right.
There's fairy shrimp there. Defines it as a vernal pool. Other
Right.
species can use it as well.
I know that.
But so that's all I'm talking about. And the commission might not even condition it as such, and that's at their discretion.
Yeah,
I'm
I was gonna
just
say,
throwing out the
if other-
information relative to the resource area. That is all.
If other commission members have a good way to try to condition that, I would love to hear it, but if not, I think it's something that we might take no action on. Knowing that hopefully it's gonna be a 1-year disturbance, and spotted salamander is a tough one too, but it's so difficult to pinpoint exactly when they will migrate and all of that good stuff.
What I will show too, just to help that discussion, is the current proposed erosion control.
That was,
So it does separate the site.
and you said they come in, generally speaking, it would be coming
Normally, we have a
across the, I'm
big
trying to think where they
night.
would migrate from, sorry.
Typically, I mean, it could be from the wetland across South Bolton Road. It could be from the upland. It could be from smaller wetlands along Spectacle Hill. I don't have a tracker on the species to go, but
No, I know. Well, because I was thinking, do we do breaks in the line during the month of March? But anytime we put breaks in the line, and then we're worried about mud, everything else migrating
Yeah.
down into the actual vernal pool. That's why I'm having difficulty trying to figure out a way in which I want to be sensitive to that, but a way in which we could condition it. And on this project, I'm not seeing a clear way. And I think it's just something we just need to really pay attention to in the future and try to look into these things. At least I know I will try to. But I could see us taking no action right now, as I just can't see a recommendation to give. Okay. Anybody have any additional comments regarding this particular project? If we were to close and try to issue an order of conditions, any comments, questions, anything you think hasn't been answered, any reason for concern still out there? And I, say any members of the commission, and I'll put that out to members of the public as well. All right, and I'm not seeing any. All right, so in that case, I was to say, I don't have my DEP file number in front of me, but I'd like to make a motion that we close the public hearing for Mallard Lane off of South Bolton Road. Do I hear a second for closing?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, starting with Paul,
Aye.
Jim,
I,
Jillian,
Aye.
and Rebecca, I'm an aye as well. I'd like to make a motion that we issue an order of conditions for Mallard Lane as drafted and discussed with the following conditions. Yeah.
Brian,
Go
I
ahead.
would say as drafted
And submitted.
and amended during this meeting. Just so then what you're saying isn't
Yep.
including just the ones we discussed this evening, because I don't want to erase the prior.
All right, in that case, I'd like to make a motion that we issue an order of conditions for Mallard Lane as drafted and amended at this evening's meeting, with the following conditions regarding treatment of the roads during the winter. That treatment of the roads be limited to pre-treatment only prior to snowfall, and any constant treatment can be used, sand can be used, but not salt. Also, that any snow storage done on site be done outside of the resource areas and resource buffer zones. And the additional condition that the plantings proposed on site, as discussed at this evening's meeting, that native species be chosen for those plantings whenever possible and practicable. Do I hear a second for that, for issuing that order?
Second,
All right, all those in favor, starting with Paul? Jim,
aye.
Jillian,
Aye.
and Rebecca, I am an aye as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good
All
night.
right, thanks, Jim. Take care. Sorry, just grabbing my agenda. All right.
I was just sharing it for you, Brian.
Oh, thank you. I was gonna say, do you want to give us an update on Fox Run Road?
Sure. I did go, so 175 Fox Run Road, just a brief summary. This was pre-pandemic, which I hate to say that's how we tell time now. So a few years ago, or a couple of years ago now, there was a hydro seeding company that decided to pull water from the perennial stream behind the Fox Run Road subdivision and purged back into the brook and turned the brook green. Basically, seed was in the brook. It also caused a significant amount of erosion because they had essentially clear cut through conservation restriction, upgrading from that. That's what was being hydro seeded. The property has since transferred hands, and the prior owner, where the enforcement order was issued to, has been working to bring it in compliance with the new owners. So I was out recently on site with their wetland specialist, who both he and myself, when I looked at the site, the only thing that was missing was boulders or split rail fence or signage to permanently memorialize that conservation restriction, which also lines with the extent of the riverfront area on site. So it's also delineating a resource area. What they do have, though, is they have wooden stakes still in place from the erosion control. So that is the only item. I am waiting on the report from the wetland specialist, but once we receive that report and they choose it was boulders or a line of shrubs for this particular site. Those were their options. Once they choose what they wish to finally memorialize that with in perpetuity, and we receive the report, which I anticipate coming within the next few days, then I would encourage the commission to vote to lift the enforcement order. But where I don't have the report in hand, I think the commission can wait until the next meeting. But once we get that report in hand, I think that would be acceptable to consider lifting the vote.
Okay. That all makes good sense to me, and luckily we are meeting next week. And I agree, we should really wait to get that before we lift it. Any comments, questions from commission members? Or any members of the public have comment, question regarding this?
No.
Seeing none. Do you want to Rebecca, do you want to give us an update on the request for a partial COC?
Yes, and I
for-
believe we actually have the
Ah.
current property owner here as well. This is specific to, actually, let me try and pull this up. It's specific to it was originally 42 Harvard Road. And we had an ORAD, and then we had a shared driveway proposal come forward through a notice of intent. This was also before the commission recently, due to an amendment to the order to incorporate the utility pole. So here is Harvard Road to the right of your screen, the existing 42 Harvard Road, the shared driveway that comes in with associated replication areas, the drainage, stormwater infrastructure, and then the 2 single-family homes. The 2 single-family homes and the septic systems with associated grading is actually outside of the jurisdictional area. However, the driveway, and there is a crossing there along with the stormwater infrastructure, replication area, all of that is within jurisdictional areas to the commission. They are requesting a partial as they are hoping to close on one of the properties fairly shortly, it seems. And I can go over, I'm going to stop share again. I can go over the letter if you would like. I will paraphrase, Mr. Chair, if you would like me to.
That would be perfectly fine. Yep. Summarize
Okay.
or paraphrase would be great.
So this is from their engineer. They highlighted the utility poles that have already been through the commission. And the commission had to authorize those poles to be installed. The shape of one of the basins, which I will bring up the plan in a moment, was adjusted slightly to accommodate the utility. The design bottom elevation of the basin has been maintained. And it also includes riprap emergency overflow as specified. Being on site both when the old shape was present and grades were present, and now seeing this, I believe this actually functions better, or will function better. I am not an engineer though, but seeing this from the engineer just echoed that as well. The other note from the engineer is associated with the culvert and crossing that was installed. It was installed slightly offset from the proposed location. The retaining walls associated with the crossing were installed at a reduced width. 22 feet were proposed, 22 feet, 19 feet is the as-built. This therefore reduced the alteration to the resource area, which originally was 275 square feet proposed, and now it's 250 square feet as built. The proposed width of the traveled surface of the driveway was maintained. Then the proposed wetland replication area was constructed. It was proposed at a 1:2 rate, and it was built at a 1 to 2.2 rate, increasing the mitigation ratio slightly. I had asked a question after the last site visit relative to the stream bed material that's used. It seemed like there was a slight difference in what was there, but there are fines and more of a natural stream bed compared to what was there before. So my only concern was just some of the material right before at the inlet and outlet to make sure that there was no scouring, which I believe they have taken care of at this time. So I don't know if Scott wants to. Scott DeSantis is the property owner currently, so I don't know if he would like to add anything at this time.
Just what you said, it sounds like the meetings we've had and what the engineer went over.
And I was gonna say, Rebecca, it's a partial. Is it growing condition? What other conditions are still left in, or is it too many to list? Or
That is a great question. Thank you for bringing that up, Brian. So what remains is essentially some erosion control will need to be removed or altered on site. That was another thing to make sure that it's not damming. But the main item is the growth, yes. So it's seeding, surprisingly, and to the site's benefit, that there is some growth showing, but it's certainly not the 75% success rate that the commission requires to consider compliance. So that is what we are waiting for, to just be assured that the site is in fact stable after we go through the winter, and if there's any overseeding that needs to occur.
If we were to issue a partial, would we have to list out those things? Is it something that we could issue as discussed, or regarding the letter submitted?
You can do as discussed in the letter submitted. You have the ability, if you want, to go through and state what's in compliance, what's not in terms of each item. But that is at the discretion of the commission.
All right. So I'll put it out to commission members. Comments, questions regarding this particular project and where it stands. And then comfortable if we were to issue a why am I blanking on the partial COC to do it just basically on what has been discussed this evening, or if you want to go line item by line item, again, I'm open either way. Well, my notes on it. All right. All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Anybody from the public here to comment on this one this evening? Not seeing that either. All right. In that case, I'd like to make a motion that we issue a partial certificate of compliance for DEP file number 112-0668. With the conditions approved as discussed at this evening's meeting. With the extent of the partial as discussed at this evening's meeting. Do I hear a second for that?
Second.
All right. All those in favor to issue the partial COC, starting with Paul?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
Jillian?
Aye.
And Rebecca, I'm an aye as well.
Okay, thank you. And I will have that drafted. So once the commission signs the document, at that time, the mailing date is when it is issued. So it will be mailed to you, Scott, or you can schedule a time to pick it up. You can hand pick it up. And at that time, that date would then be the issuance date.
Yeah, that would be great if I could
Okay.
pick it.
Yep. So then at that point, you'll need to get it recorded at the Registry of Deeds and then provide us with the book and page, and then provide us an update at the end of the growing period and come back for your full COC request.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Did commission members have a chance to read through the minutes, or was that your last two meetings? And if so, any edits, changes, questions? And does anybody, and if not, does anybody need more time to read through the minutes at all? Okay. In that case, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes for our October 18th, 2022 and our November 15th, 2022 meetings as drafted and submitted at this evening's meeting. Do I hear a second for approving minutes?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, starting with Paul,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Jillian,
Aye.
and Rebecca, I'm an aye as well. did everybody see our latest iteration of the budget in your packages? So pull mine up, and if so, were there any outstanding questions or changes, edits, anything? Or are we comfortable with it as it's currently as the request will currently go in?
Yep.
Okay.
Comfortable.
In that case, Rebecca, you just basically need a roll call vote.
Yes, a vote, whether you are for or not. And if you're not, please let me know, because I would be happy to make those amendments right now.
I was gonna say, yeah, we needed to submit this yesterday, literally.
Yeah, what I will say very quickly though, Brian, if I may, is there was a change. So originally we had talked about potentially including a $10,000 for two different items, or just under. One ended up, we got an estimate back for 9,800. So under the cost. So that means even if we go out to a couple different prices, it could be around that. The other was associated with the Mass Trails grant, and that double checking the match. Again, that was not, it was, I think it was 8,000 was actually what we budgeted for, but we're asking for 9,000 because the remainder of the match is based on volunteer time. So if we don't, we have a great group of volunteers, but if for some reason we don't get the maximum hours to contribute to that match, we want to be sure that we're still receiving the full amount of funds.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Anybody have any questions regarding that? Or either of those two little changes? All right. In that case, I'm going to call for a roll call vote to approve our proposed 2023-2024 fiscal year 23 budget. Fiscal year 24 budget. I'm sorry. Yeah, I always got those backwards. So I'm going to call for a roll call vote to approve our fiscal year 24 proposed budget. All those in favor, please say, or all those who approve of the budget, please say aye, starting with Paul.
Aye.
Jim.
Aye.
Jillian.
Aye.
And Rebecca, I'm an aye as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want me to run through
I was going to say, yeah,
updates?
if you could walk us through the updates, that would be
Sure.
fantastic.
So the Bolton Trails Connectivity Improvement Project, we're still in the initiation phase, but on the 7th, I have a meeting with the grant administrators to basically just walk through the different forms we'll have to fill out and the process that they anticipate. And then they'll actually walk us through a few in terms of calculating volunteer time and match hours and all of the information that comes with the grant, and walk us through the timeline and the standards that they require, purchasing standards as well. Then we had that shouldn't say upcoming, I apologize, the trail walk the day after Thanksgiving, which was great. It was a little, it was sprinkling a little bit, but it was okay. We were undercover. We had a decent turnout, and we went from Sand Road at Forbush Mill Field parking area to the Taggart Forest Lane, which we hope in the future will be a permanent trail open to the public. But right now, it is not a through trail because it does cross private property. So we're working with the property owner to get an easement, even just a temporary verbal easement, that we will be able to allow the public on to do that walk. Then we have the ongoing Nashua River Communities Resilient Lands Management Project. We have our second task group meeting actually right before this meeting next Tuesday. So those who are as enthusiastic as I am can certainly join. It will start at 5:30. And if not, we do update the website, although some of the pages are still under construction, we'll say. But we also have some site visits coming up this spring, so just keep an eye out for that. The volunteer land steward position will remain open until someone fills it. So I encourage those interested to please reach out. And then, of course, the Open Space and Recreation Plan Subcommittee. We're looking to start the Open Space and Recreation Plan update starting in January. So please fill out the survey if you have not done so already. It's available through the agenda. I will keep it on there until the deadline. Deadline for submittal is December 31st. They are also available at the library, the Council on Aging, my office, and then there is a QR code at each of those locations and the Bean. So if you're getting coffee, scan it and fill it out there, or if you're checking out a book, scan it. That feedback's really important because that directs the next 7 years of open space and recreation planning and the actions that I take, this commission takes, Parks and Rec. So it's an easy way to participate through the survey. And I believe that's all I have for updates.
So much. Appreciate it. Excuse me. Any commission members have any new business? Anything fun to add? All right. Seeing none, I'd like to make a motion that we officially adjourn our Tuesday, November 29th meeting of the Bolton Conservation Commission. Do I hear a second for adjourning?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, starting with Paul,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Jillian,
Hi.
and Rebecca, I am an I as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.